My name is Neha Varshney, and I will be your host for today. And today I have two very special guests with me. We have Sam Bhagwat, who is the co-founder of Gatsby, as well as Netlify's now principal engineer. Very exciting. And if you didn't already know, he's also the author of The Modular, the web's new architecture. It's a great book. I would get your hands on it ASAP. And if you ask us some really engaging questions, maybe you'll be one of the lucky few that will get a signed copy sent your way. We also have Nikan Shahidi. He is the CEO of Webstacks. And Webstacks is a web agency that actually helps B2B technology companies launch and scale their websites. So thank you both so much for joining us here today and, offering up your time to, let everyone know about modular web design. So I know when I was talking to the both of them previously, we were kind of discussing what topics would make sense for us to kind of really dive into and get into the nitty-gritty. And that's when modular web design came up. And I'll be honest, I'm a marketer and I was like, what is this? This sounds super technical. I don't know if I can get my mind around it. And that's when Sam actually was like, you know how you're always bugging the engineering team to, make some changes for you because they hard coded some pages. And I'm like, yeah, I can totally resonate with that. And he's like, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about templates. We're going to talk about how we can make them a lot more flexible. So marketing teams are actually empowered to go in and make those changes themselves without doing the back and forth with engineering teams constantly. So I am super jazzed about this topic. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to both Sam and Nikan to dive into it further.
Thanks, Neha. I'm really excited to be here with everybody today. We're gonna have this hopefully be a pretty interactive session, although we're gonna need to lean on the Q&A. It looks like if we've got the chat, if the chat is disabled, so please leave comments or questions in the Q&A, and we will and we'll get to them. So I think this conversation, and I'm going to start sharing my screen here as we have a few sort of slides here, and this kind of conversation that we're having is really a conversation that's gone on for a while, which is kind of a conversation about how to empower marketing teams and how engineering teams and marketing teams can work together, and to kind of start off, when we think about technology, website architecture, right, there's a lot of different parts and components to that. So there is the technology choices that the engineering makes, or that if you're a tech lead, might be making, choosing your Jamstack framework, choosing a headless CMS, choosing your hosting platform. But there's also site architecture, right, like what your templates are. If you think about the site structure, right, there's your component architecture, which is, you typically will be using some sort of component library, at least, I'm kind of talking maybe about a professional website, something that you're doing for a client or for your company, that, you might break down the page designs that you're getting into these kind of logical reusable building blocks and then put them in something like Storybook, right? And then your content architecture, which is, if you're using headless CMS like Contentful, right, you're going to have this content schema of different content models that are related to each other, and you're kind of giving that over to the marketing team to create new content, create new pages, often based on that content, right? And this is kind of the idea of a content-driven landing page, where when you create a new model in the CMS, in your headless CMS, it actually generates a new page. And then maybe by rearranging, sections or what have you inside that page model, you might be able to rearrange sections or create sections on that page and kind of edit the content there. So it looks like we've got the chat working again. Great. So we'll kind of start this off with a question, which is, have you, built this sort of site before where you had these content-driven landing pages? And we'll leave it for 30 seconds, a minute for folks to share their experiences in the chat. What challenges have you faced while doing this? Okay, Aurelian says marketing thinks it's too complicated because they don't have WYSIWYG, and so that is something we've heard as well. Gareth says it takes a long time, and every time you think you've got it right, someone requests a block you never thought about. Aha, yeah, Gareth, that's basically exactly what we're kind of talking about, is how to think about this like beforehand and to kind of anticipate these sorts of requests. Migrating from hard coding pages to dynamic ones can be challenging, says Dominic. Yep, absolutely. There's delays in seeing new pages get published. Absolutely. Not going to talk about that a lot, but that'll be kind of a future webinar. Struggle teaching design team how to build modular components. This should be a great, Nikan's material should be great. Creating the schema to accommodate all the different fields, Gareth, again, completely. Okay, I'm going to kind of keep going on, although there may be more things, that come in the chat. Please keep putting it in, and I think we're going to kind of keep referring to these as we go on. So, again, for those that have done it so far, there's a way that kind of avoids the challenges that you may have run into in the past. And it's actually something that when Nikan shared it with me, how they build things, my mind was just blown, because we've heard a lot of these challenges before. We've seen them with teams that we know well, and it was great to see that they had actually designed and architected the process in a way to avoid sort of these change requests going back and forth between engineering and marketing, right? To avoid these kind of super complex content models that are always kind of keep growing and expanding and stuff. So there is a better way, and without further ado, I'll kind of hand it over to Nikan to share what that is.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to go ahead and quickly share my screen here to give you guys a visual around kind of the process and way of thinking around a modular website. And really, when we start thinking about a modular website, what are the goals that we're trying to solve for, right? The value prop of this webinar: stop hard coding your website pages. And that's really what this comes down to. It's taking a step back from the traditional thought process of how to build and design a website and really breaking it up into the smallest pieces, creating an architecture that's reusable and composable. So what does that mean? If we take a look at traditional web design, the process that we've found is it's full of bottlenecks, right? When you start off, you're thinking of, we're going to start with our wireframes, we'll then move into copywriting, we'll then go into design, then we'll go into development, and then QA, and then kind of rinse and repeat that over and over again. Well, what's the problem there? It's full of dependencies, right? In order to start design, you need to have your copywriting. In order to start your design, you need to have your wireframe done. And the idea behind a modular website is embracing change. The wireframe, the strategy, initial strategy is going to change. Your marketing team is going to want to test things, and empowering them to have the tools that they need within guardrails, of course. And I heard all the comments below. What are the impossible things to predict a marketing team is going to have? Well, it's not that challenging if you're starting to think forward thinking, what does the marketing team need? So what you're looking at right now is Figma. Figma is what the design team here at Webstacks uses for design collaboration, and really the baseline of designing and developing a website. And the key here is something that I actually read in the comments, was ensuring that the design team and the development team and the marketing team are all completely aligned, right? In order to have a successful modular website, your design team needs to be practicing modular design, the using of reusable components. Your development team needs to be embracing that same exact thing. And that is what's going to help, increase the velocity of your guys' website, and at the same time, empower marketers to build on their own, and build on their own in a way that makes them feel good about the work that they're doing. There's no joy in creating the same exact landing page every single time. And that's often the pushback that design teams are going to give and marketing teams are going to give when they start thinking about reusable components, right? Every page is going to look exactly the same. We don't want this. It's going to be boring. And it doesn't have to be the case, right? If you're thinking about variations and you're thinking about, what are the needs of the design team or the marketing team? What do they need to be proud of the work that they're putting together? Once you start thinking forwardly about that, you can start building out these schemas and structures that embrace that. So the reason why we like Figma, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see Figma has this option for properties and variations, and that is very synonymous with props that you might find in your React components. So our design team, when they're designing out components, they're thinking about different variations, dark mode, light mode. If marketers want to change the heading size from large to small, and how that might affect the copy, because how many times have you heard marketing teams say, hey, my copy's changed on my hero component, and now it spans 6 line breaks. This isn't going to work. So forward thinking, hey, maybe we're allowing them to have small, medium, large. It's all about having guardrails. Like, you don't want to give the marketing team total autonomy to change every aspect of the page, and then you have a Frankenstein website, but creating these guardrails to ensure that they have the flexibility to change their website and variation as they're creating these landing pages. So you could see things like dark mode and light mode, for example, but maybe even layout shifts. So shifting your headings from being split on the right side to stacked. These are little things that can go a long way when updating your website and creating variation, and they could always be added on and adapted to and iterated on over time. So it's much less effort involved in launching a new page or launching a new variation of a component, because you're really only thinking about the page or the initiative as these discrete Lego blocks. So when we take a zoom out of this page, we're really just seeing a subset of reusable components, right? These are the components that are going to be found on every website. It's not rocket science. Most of the best websites in the world that are adopting this modular approach all reuse the same types of content blocks over and over again. And it's the kind of the design teams and the marketing teams that, define that variation and define that flexibility and ensure that it's on brand and has the guardrails that marketing needs to be successful. So you can see here things like switchbacks. This is a switchback component. I love this component just because everyone's like, what's a switchback component? Why do you call it a switchback component? And the reason why we call it a switchback component is because it was the only thing we could agree on. It sounded nice, and we went for it. Everyone calls this a different thing, 50-50 split, 2-column content block, blase. We went ahead and just stuck with switchback. And that in and of itself has so many benefits. It's this philosophy that the naming conventions are, everyone's bought in to what each component does, what it's named, how it can be used. And that's another aspect of modular design that really you need to make sure, like I mentioned before, your team is on the same page about the components that exist.
This is super sweet. Thank you for sharing this, Nikan. I had a question for you. Do you have any real life examples of companies that have done speedy website redesigns using these techniques?
Absolutely. So ServiceTitan, I think, is one of the core examples of kind of using this idea of a modular design. And the reason why they have been so successful over the last 4 years since kind of adopting this modern web stack is this idea that they have been able to build upon the foundation that they started. So you're not thinking of bringing on a website and initially thinking of all of the infinite permutations that the team might need and the different content types that might exist. But really, it all started with a baseline, started with a simple page template, maybe a blog template, and started adapting this philosophy. And ServiceTitan's website has gone through 2 or 3 massive redesigns and massive facelifts over the last 3 or 4 years. And the level of effort to do that is so much smaller when you're thinking about a modular website, right? We're using global properties, we're using global styles, we're using global components and reusable components. So when you're changing things in some areas, it's affecting the entire site. So the operational expense of making widespread initiative changes across the site is significantly lower when you're approaching it in this reusable way. Another great example is Calendly. Calendly, when we first engaged with them, their content structure was kind of all over the place, right? It wasn't adopting this idea of modularity it was kind of one hard-coded page template. Every single time you wanted to make a change, you had to kind of tap into the engineering team. And since working with them, we've adopted this design system, this robust component architecture, and the marketing team has total autonomy to build pages, which means more pages are getting up faster, and generally higher quality.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing this, Nikan. This is really great, kind of like seeing this in action, and kind of seeing the high level templates, broken down into these specific elements with sort of like design components. So I'm gonna kind of share my screen and just kind of abstract some of the lessons that we see here from Nikan's demo, right, which is the principles behind modular web design. And we talked about some of them, but we're going to kind of talk about them a little bit more, right? Dive a bit deeper. So the first one is, again, like, don't hard code pages. Like everything you saw from the examples, like the home page of each of those, of both those sites you shared, right? Those are just page templates, the same as anything else, right? They didn't, they kind of built the templates, and then it was like really easy to build the pages because they've already built the templates. It was literally like 15 minutes inside the CMS just building it, because they'd already had the templates for each page, right? Suddenly you build the templates, you can crank out those pages real fast. The second thing is, Nikan touched on this a bit, but like the descriptiveness, the specificness of their component names. They avoided things like section, right? Section is generic, right? Okay, are there 3 sections next to each other or whatever? Like, okay, well, we've got this card deck where we've got these like that's a grid of things, and then we've got the switchback where you've got the kind of the text on the left and the picture on the right, or vice versa, right? 50-50 split, whatever you want to call it, right? And these kind of like, they kind of narrowed down the APIs to prevent kind of one component that tried to do everything, which I think was, I forget who in the chat, but somebody in the chat commented that their components kind of got like grew out of kind of control. The API just grew out of control, which we totally relate. We've like, that can be a challenge, right? That's a very common challenge that teams face. Again, the types of components you need are just often related to the type of site you're building. So Webstacks focuses on building B2B, specifically B2B SaaS. And so their templates are very related to that specific industry use case. If you're doing like e-commerce, you are going to have different templates, right? You're going to have product pages and so on, right? And you're going to have, anyway, that's going to be different, but that's okay. Just think about kind of the type of site you're building and like design your component architecture around what type of site it is. And then like, back to what Nikan said earlier about, you want to give marketing and design enough options that they can create real variation, right? But without giving them so many options that it becomes inconsistent or confusing. And typically the way that we've seen that like, if you go through and look through Nikan's, through the components that they build, typically you see 2 to 3 props for important components, right? And each of these props has 2 to 3 options. And this isn't like a hard and fast rule, right? But that said, if you have like 7 props and each prop has like 8 options, I mean, you probably did something wrong along the way, right? Because it's just going to be too complex for people to change in meaningful ways. And then the last thing kind of I'll say before I kick it back over to Nikan, and there were kind of 2 mind-blowing experiences when Nikan was sharing this with us. And the first was kind of seeing the intricacy of how he was doing it, right? How Webstacks was doing it inside Figma, so that they could kind of see it from a design system way of looking at it, and just kind of mock and model out the different variations within their, within Figma itself. And then the second thing was what Nikan's about to share with you now, right? Which is a way that actually this kind of modular design thinking take a step back, and it really changed their whole project workflow. So without further ado, actually I'll pause kind of before kicking it back over to Nikan, and just kind of like any quick questions that we have before we kind of go on, because I don't want to just kind of zoom through before we kind of switch topics to the next thing. And maybe actually while we're waiting for folks to put in questions, we'll just kind of respond to some of the comments. which says, Oliver says, building a content-driven site is a huge effort. You have to build the CMS to be able to deliver the schema for all the data. That's huge. Yeah, it definitely is a lot of work. And then the result being you empower the marketing team to be successful. Andrew Kumar asks that modularity is very impressive, which has me thinking, can some of the modules work across websites? There are some modules on ServiceTitan and Calendly that seem pretty similar. I guess, Nikan, that's probably a question for you.
That's a great question. And I think there's also some follow-ups in there in the chat. I might just share my screen here and show you a little bit. The fact of the matter is it's true, right? And that's the idea. Sorry about that, guys. So many tabs. That's the idea. So when we're handing off our development, our design to development, we're really forward thinking about the documentation, about the reusability. And we have our own processes internally that get us up and running in a far faster way than rebuilding everything over and over and over again. And there's tremendous value in this. So for every Webstacks website that we're putting together, we're providing our clients with the documentation on how we got here, what components do what fields map to what in the CMS. If we're going to be onboarding engineers, what props, what the definitions are, what they're used for. So this is like a big piece of our workflow as a company, from our sales to our delivery. It's all about reusability. It's all about, saving time and putting that intellectual equity into other areas, net new areas where marketing teams can benefit from that.
Yeah. And consider that, like, if you work inside an agency, or even if you or if you work inside a company, right? This kind of reusability is what accelerates progress over time. If you're able to take the work that you did in the past and apply it to like new sites faster and quicker, right? That's what makes your fourth project be smoother than your third project, and your third project be smoother than your second project. Okay, cool. I think we don't see any other questions, so let's move on. Aurelian asks, can we have a list of the main components you guys use? And I think that's actually a perfect segue into the next part. So Nikan, do you want to?
Yes, totally. And also I would like to say we have an entire guide on our website for modular design, and it goes over those list of main components, naming conventions, how to use them, what the components are, what marketing teams typically ask for. So if you guys want to check that out, it is in the description of the webinar. So what Sam was kind of alluding to was how we took this approach to modular design and kind of flipped it on its head for our entire sales process and our company workflow. So we're approaching one of the most challenging and frustrating things about scoping a website, and really rethinking the idea of modular pricing. So what we did, and I want to say this is almost like a 6 to 12 months ago, we made this initiative, was the idea of building this front-facing calculator to our prospects on how to price websites. It was twofold, benefited kind of like our sales team in the sense that they weren't wasting their time putting together proposals and generating those proposals, sharing with clients, and then getting ghosted for weeks. And everyone knows that feeling of spending a ton of time going through putting together a proposal and not hearing back from a prospect. So what we did was put together this proposal generator based on certain components, right? So the page templates, the individual components, things like headers, footers, truss bars, and came up with a price that made sense for us as a business, and ultimately led to higher close rates and higher deal sizes. And the reason for that is let me go ahead and pick our content management system in our front-end framework. And the reason for that is we're putting the power in the hands of the prospects, right? We're saying, this is how we price things. We're not going to hide behind a subset of hours that we're going to arbitrarily come up with after, 2 or 3 calls. We know how we price websites. We know how we deliver websites. We're very confident in that. And this is how we arrive at our pricing. And it's been incredibly well received. It's really breaking down the red tape that traditional agencies kind of have in that sales process and saying, this is how we price things. If you want to add components, here's our calculator, go ahead and add. You can see the pricing change. If you want to add individual pages, maybe you want a resource hub, or you're planning on maximizing your content like content team and doing things like downloadable assets, success stories, you can start seeing the price of the website change dramatically based on these inputs. And this has been hugely well received by our sales team and by our prospects. They absolutely love this.
And I think this is kind of a great example of how, starting with the idea of templating and, having specific defined components, specific defined templates is actually like, again, it changes their whole workflow. As an agency, it changes the way in which they interact with clients. It kind of provides this shared screen where they can have the discussions with customers around scope, which, for those who have been at agencies or for those who have freelance, that's always the hardest part, right? The client always wants more, but they're always like, oh crap, I didn't realize how much that would cost. Okay, like let's rethink about this. And like this provides because it's broken down modularly, right? Like this provides a jumping off spot to talk about these questions with clients, or like, again, like you could think about maybe you're inside a company and you're having this conversation with a marketer, with maybe the web marketing manager or the VP of marketing, who's a stakeholder in this process, right? So thanks, Nikan, for kind of sharing that. So I think this is probably a good point. We've taken kind of questions throughout, but to kind of throw it open to questions, throw it open to questions, and just, anything kind of throughout the presentation, whether it be, whether it be the storybook aspect, whether it be the Figma aspect, whether it be the specific pages and templates, the real world examples that Nikan shared, the abstract principles that we kind of got from it in terms of like component API design, for example. Please just share any questions that you have about any of that in the chat, and the relevant person can kind of respond.
Sweet. Well, thank you both so much for walking us through all of that. That was amazing. Looks like we're already getting a few questions coming our way, so I'll just pose them to both of you, and then whoever wants to take it can take it. So we have a question here. Is there a GitHub repo for this web interface? I love this concept. We could use something similar when dealing with our internal customers.
I think that's a question for me. So this is an internal tool that we have. It's a little bit more advanced in the sense that it has like private keys that are linked to like our Panda docs, and it's a real internal tool. What you're looking at right now is just the front-facing calculator built using Retool. So if you guys are familiar with Retool, it's a SaaS product that makes it super easy to build out these types of internal tooling and essentially strips away the need for having designers come in and build front-end interfaces. So if you check out retool.com, it is an excellent starting point for building any sort of internal tool, calculator, or application.
Yeah, seems like a few others share the sentiment that Retool is a complete game changer and that they can't recommend it enough. Awesome. We have another question here. Do you share these modular components between projects on a code level, or are you using them as a starting point and then customizing to a project? In other words, how much code can be shared, or even CMS setup that can be shared?
Great question. I would say for the most part, when the components are pretty straightforward and reusable, we're kind of encouraging our engineering team to reuse as much knowledge sharing that we've had over the years. So things like switchbacks or those hero components generally are similar across websites. So you could save a lot of time by reusing some code, CSS, styling, and even content models that you're doing in the CMS to help save time building out these pages. Because really, like we mentioned before, these successful websites all use the same kind of content pieces, and it's really about, or content blocks. It's really about visually styling them to represent your brand well and providing the variation. that marketing teams love.
And Nikan, can you bring up the Figma mockup again?
Sure. Is there any questions in particular on the mockup?
Then I think Jay is asking, do you have a guideline for design system integration, built-in Figma integration?
So we have a pretty defined design to development handoff. And what you guys are looking at here is just like a playground. I'm going to quickly share my screen here to give an example of what a design system could look like at Webstacks, because this is a very simplified version of the concept of a design system. But when we're approaching design systems at Webstacks, we're really taking that philosophy of atomic design, starting with the foundations, things like colors, codifying it, ensuring designers, marketers, developers are all speaking the same language. And these are then handed off to development. They're going to be implemented in isolation in a storybook environment and then kind of tied to the CMS at a later stage. So things like typography, how typography is going to be across the website. Documentation is a big piece of what we do at Webstacks. So we want to make sure that things are documented well. And again, this is a starting point for a lot of our projects. So same kind of like templated approach when we're building out other design systems. And then it really gets to the meat of the things like, you know, your header, your footer, the reusable components that exist on the marketing website is all packaged up in a design system and handed off from design to development.
And then Devanand asks, what front-end stack are you using?
So the front-end stack depends on a lot of things, right? It depends on the business case. A lot of times we're working with software companies. So their team might have a preference towards using React, Next, Gatsby. So it really just depends on the business case. We found a lot of success using Gatsby because the Gatsby content layer makes it so much easier for our developers to just build out components. The plugins are incredibly useful. You don't have to write these APIs in order to populate content from your CMS. But really, this concept can be used across any sort of front-end framework that you might be using in your projects.
And then someone else asks about the CMS that's helpful here.
So the CMS doesn't really have an effect on the approach to this, and all headless content management systems are approaching it in like a relational way, right? So having this idea of a logical content management system makes it super easy to adopt this type of framework. You're thinking at like a high level, you have one content model for pages, and that content model accepts a reference to many components. And it's just building pages like Lego blocks, dragging and dropping. The hierarchy of the page can change. The content team has the autonomy to do that. And whenever there's a need to change anything or add a variation, you're going to the engineering team or the design team.
It's because you guys have built this with both Contentful and Sanity, right?
Contentful, Sanity, Builder, Dado, the list goes on and on. It's not a platform agnostic approach to development or design. It's really just ensuring that once you pick a tech stack, your teams, whether it's marketing, design, development, they're all on the same page.
And I think that comes back to kind of this concept of modular or like composable, however we want to kind of like frame it, right? Which is that like ultimately at the end of the day, the reason that a lot of us are building in this way is that we think we should be able to kind of like swap out different pieces. We're against the monolith. We're against like everything being in the sort of this like one WordPress or like Sitecore Drupal thing, and everything's kind of stuck and glued together really tightly. Like we are for, having these different pieces that you can kind of pull in and out, right? And that's one of the big advantages of building in this way and doing development in this way and doing design in this way and doing content in this way, is that you actually have the ability to swap out these different pieces. And I think this is what Nikan, what you've shared is such a great kind of like example and almost like instantiation of that abstract concept of modular or composable architecture.
Right. And that has benefited us like as an agency, right? When you think of web agencies, sometimes they're tied to a particular platform. You think of your WordPress agency as you think of your Shopify agencies, and straying away from that breaks their process, breaks their delivery, pretty much breaks their company, right? But really getting complete and total buy-in from a sales, CS, development and design perspective on this modular approach makes it so easy for us to build out more complicated websites with new technologies. So when a prospect comes in and says, hey, I want to use Prismic as our headless CMS, can you guys build with this? We're like, hell yeah, it doesn't change our process. It's a little bit of a different learning curve from our team. We'll be transparent with them. We'll let them know like we haven't used it before, but this is our process. It's built for that exact use case. When you take one thing out and replace it with something else, doesn't break the process, doesn't break the delivery. It's just a different technology.
Sweet. Looks like we're getting some more questions coming your way. Ricardo is asking, how do you bring or update a Figma design into a modular component?
Great question. So let me share my screen again. And
I love this, live demos on the spot.
I do love a good live demo. Let me open up the old Webstacks Figma 2 in the meantime and give you guys a quick rundown on how these pieces kind of tie together from design in Figma to Storybook to Contentful. And I know there was another question in there, and like how aligned is Storybook with the CMS at the end of the day? So when we're building out a new website, we're starting with that. Can you guys, oh, I think that's the wrong. You guys just saw my desktop. True CEO. There we go. Can you guys see my my screen here?
We got it.
So when we're building out these websites, we're really thinking about this concept of reusable architecture. We've mentioned this before. These purple elements that you see inside of Figma, these all tie back to a reusable and composable design system. So the Figma that you're looking at is a document that pulls reusable components from a design system. So you're seeing this tab is called Launch Q1. This is going to be where we're launching our Q1 website. This WS design system is our entire design system that if we change aspects of here, it will publish and push to all of our documents. So if, for example, I want to, change our trust bar here, right click that, go to component, it's going to open up our design system. As you can see here, I can make that change in the design system. When I publish it, it'll be visible to all pages that use that trust bar. So it's really tying in this concept of modularity with the design portion. Technical design is kind of like what we call it here at Webstacks. The other piece is how these components, when we're building them out, tie back into Storybook and ultimately the content management system. So what we're trying to do ultimately is offer content editors a visual experience, a playground for them to see what components they have at their disposal. So this design system is directly synced up to the GitHub. When there are new components that are built, they'll be updated inside of Storybook, and marketing teams can see what they have at their disposal and how the fields that they're seeing here affect the fields that they're seeing in the CMS. So for example, if I want to change the heading size on desktop to be extra large, content marketers can go in there and change that. They could see how text changes based on the flow. And then they can ultimately say, hey, now I have more text. I want only to go to 2 lines. They can make those changes and can start experimenting without having to be inside of the headless CMS as they're building out these pages. So in short, we want to map these props as close as we can to what content editors are going to be experiencing inside of the CMS.
Nikan, I have another question for you from Evangelina. What issues have you run into in sharing the design system in Figma with marketers and other stakeholders who aren't used to working in Figma? And what are some tips you have for circulating the Figma files as a source of truth and getting stakeholder buy-in?
Great question again. So stakeholder buy-in and alignment is the key to a successful implementation like this. We mentioned this before, is ensuring when you're going to be kicking off a website project, you have total alignment on what you're building. And when you explain it in those simple terms about, I love using the reference of Lego blocks and breaking up the Legos and seeing how many different variations of a Lego piece you can make with just 5 or 6 Lego blocks. Once you get buy-in on that, it makes it so much easier to get buy-in on the idea of these reusable components. And when you double down on the idea of like, this is not going to be boring pages, we're going to add variation, we're going to add the ability for you to change things like, background colors, flow, dark mode, light mode, layout changes across components. Those are things that make marketers feel really, really good. And at the same time, makes designers feel really, really good, because designers don't want to feel like they're constrained into a design and can't express their creativity or express a concept in a unique way.
Eric here has a great question. Nikan, also for you. How accessible is this architecture to small businesses that don't actually have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars available?
Another great question. These are great questions. I would say that I don't think that this approach makes a website any more expensive or makes the process of building the website any longer. It's really, really just rethinking your workflows. How are you approaching this? How are you planning to build this website out? And if you can get alignment internally on how you're going to be building this, you might be able to, remove a couple of things here, like Storybook, for example, might be a nice to have, and it might not be the most efficient use of time, but it's not incredibly expensive to rethink kind of your workflows in a way that kind of promotes this idea of modular design.
Looks like Johnny's like, can Nikan answer Chris's question? Okay, Chris, found your question. Is there a performance trade-off? I have just run ServiceTitan and Webstacks through Lighthouse, and I'm not receiving very good results.
Great question. So Google Page Speed Insights is an incredible tool that frustrates developers across the realms. So there's a lot of different things that Google Page Speed Insights will report, especially for companies that have more sophisticated tech stacks. So when you think of things like Google Tag Manager and third-party scripts, things like Drift, a lot of these, Drift, Intercom, all of these kind of like third-party tools that are interacting with a website add to a score that Google kind of chooses to weight and negatively impacts kind of that score. But from a user experience perspective, going around these websites, you're seeing how quick, how fast they are. Is it a slow website? Absolutely not. Are there ways that they can be improved? Absolutely. But I hate Google Page Speed Insights. I don't think it's an effective way to measure the performance of a website. I think user experience is always the way to go when it comes to measuring a website performance.
Well said. We have a question here from Sampath Kumar. How to convert Figma to React code?
So I actually know there's a ton of tools out there that claim to do this pretty well. We just use our developers. They're kind of like taking the design. Figma does a really good job of like explaining kind of the styles, extracting it. But our developers are looking at the handoff documents that design is giving, so the desktop, tablet, mobile, and developing the React components based on those designs. I know there are some like React to Figma plugins. I can't speak for them, but I think there are some tools that might even be able to expedite this process.
And then I think looking at time, we may want to stick to like 1 or 2 last questions. Like Aurelian asks how you solved live preview.
Like from the CMS to the static page build.
So yeah, I mean, definitely depends on your tech stack. Gatsby has a live preview function that works pretty well. Vercel has a similar thing. Netlify, you guys have an incredible preview function that you could use to preview pages. So that's not typically an issue that we've faced. But in order to, like I said, expedite that autonomy, if you will, for the components, we love using Storybook. We love giving it to content editors. They can see kind of the components that they're looking at before clicking publish. Everyone kind of gets nervous when they want to click publish on a new page. So having something visual like this definitely helps.
It looks like Alex has one. Great points in trying to avoid the monolith. Do you have any advice for agencies moving away from a modular WordPress workflow into this platform agnostic approach? We've gotten some internal buy-in, but clients tend to want what they're already familiar with.
Yeah, I think really it comes down to getting buy-in from anything, right? So when you're approaching gathering buy-in from not only like maybe changing your workflow, changing your tech stack, but really thinking about what are the challenges that you're trying to solve and what are the solutions that you're bringing to the table. So for us, the idea of modular design, we kind of promote the idea of the scalability, right? When you're investing in this idea of a composable architecture, it can have major effects down the line when it comes to redesigning your website. If you want to make wide scale changes across the board, there's so much less investment in making those changes because you have this architecture that is reusable and composable and can be affected by what we kind of call a flip of the switch. So that idea of scalability oftentimes gets a lot of buy-in from stakeholders, because generally you're saying, instead of approaching this website redesign as a project that is going to be done once every 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, you're really thinking, we're going to create this architecture that enables us to have a website redesign or iteration every month, every 2 months, every 3 months. As the brand changes, as the message changes, marketing can make those changes.
Sweet. Well, I think we're good on time now. Let's just wrap it up. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you did register for this webinar, you will be getting an email in your inbox in the next couple of days with the recording. So feel free to share it out with your teams or anyone else that you think could really benefit from the value that both Sam and Nikan provided. I know I learned a lot from listening to the both of you of how to build universal page templates that are actually very powerful, so we can actually build entire client websites with them, how to use these techniques to even eliminate hard-coded pages. And at the end of the day, what's most important to me as a marketer, how to make my life a hell lot easier. So thank you both so much. And for everyone that joined us today, we really value your time and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.